This game right here is the definition of ahead of its time, and is a big reason I wanted to make these kinds of videos to begin with. No screenshot could ever do this game justice. Its art in motion and feeling the raw power of every hit as you go all out on your controller just feels incredible. Today, we'll be looking at the forgotten masterpiece that is God Hand, which was released in 2006 on the PlayStation 2. There really is nothing like God Hand, even when it comes to the kind of game it is in its own genre. It's kind of a blend of a traditional action game with how you can dodge and punish enemies, but you also have beat 'em up elements such as the ability to pick up items to attack with, as well as getting healing items from destroying crates. Which is interesting since this is the only example I've ever seen of a beat 'em up game being in 3D, they're mainly known for being 2D with them sticking to their arcade roots. Getting into the game itself, God Hand has you playing as Gene, who wields the game's namesake as his primary source of attack. You'll be settling most encounters with your bare knuckles. Gene himself as a character is this strange blend of both Dante and Travis Touchdown. He's not as vulgar as Travis, nor as stylish as Dante. He's more of a get things done kind of guy who rarely speaks but is more than willing to clap back whenever it's needed.
Fine with me. Hopefully you'll get some exercise.
Throughout your journey, you're accompanied by Olivia, who is the reason you wield the God Hand to begin with after losing your own arm in an act of heroism when helping her out. She grants you the God Hand along with its incredible power, and the main group of villains are out to take it from you, with your rival Azil also possessing the left God Hand. Story-wise, things are nice and simple. The villains want to revive the Demon King with the arm that you're using for good, and you want to pretty much just beat them up with you going through the chain of command to stop them. Azil, your rival, is probably the first Virgil clone who will become a bit of a trend with these kinds of action games. His main theme is also a nod to Devil May Cry. So now that we've established the general plot of the game with you progressing to prevent the big bad from getting the two arms, let's get into the best part of God Hand. In all honesty, I wanted to get the story out of the way in order to talk about what makes this game so special. The combat in this game is truly unlike anything I've ever witnessed. The first level is amazing at indirectly teaching the player how to play. Each face button corresponds to an attack, and there are a ton of moves you can learn. You literally make your own combos and they all connect into one another. If you're a fighting game player, all of this will immediately click with you. You basically want to have an enemy in hit stun for as long as possible before they can break out of it through juggling or any other means. On top of that, you also have your roulette wheel. This is where your attack will have complete priority and can range from sending the enemy flying with a baseball bat, punching them like a scene from Dragon Ball, and everyone's favourite, the Ball Buster. The laugh track that accompanies this move never gets old, and of course it can only be used on the male characters. There's also your meter that once full makes you invincible alongside your moves having no delay to them. Use this when you need to get out of a pinch. It's the resource you gain by dealing damage and can really change the tide of battle and just makes you feel like an actual truck that isn't stopping for no one. The user experience here is immaculate, nothing is too hard to understand, and the opening level is an excellent skill curve at teaching the player that this isn't going to be easy, but man will it be satisfying once you've conquered it. The second analog stick is also used as your dodge, which has 4 separate dodges. You've got your rolls left and right, but on top of that there's also this swaying motion you can do, and once again successfully avoiding every hit here feels phenomenal. Every enemy has a breakaway move, but hypothetically you can juggle enemies into an infinite if they don't break away from you. There's nothing like God Hand's controls when it comes to any action game I've played. The synergy is just perfect and it never gets old. There's no gimmicks either. Similar to something like Sekiro, there are no points where the gameplay deviates because what you start with here is all you'll ever need to reach the end. Also, similar to Sekiro, you reach a moment where all is clicked when it comes to the combat. There's a high skill ceiling, but stick through the defeats because the experience here is well worth it. Hit stuns and juggles are the name of the game. You'll want to do anything to extend that combo just a little more. To be fair, this entire game just speaks for itself, art in motion really. Anything happening on screen can speak more for the game's quality than words ever could.
Man Productions presents Man Getting Hit by Football.
Now, there's going to be some hot takes here, but please let me cook. So, God Hand is a very linear game, they don't make them like this no more. Each level has you moving on from the next with the option in between progressing to save and hit up the shops for upgrades to your health or moveset, then you simply move on to the next stage. Hang on a minute, isn't this the same area from Sonic 06? What a coincidence both games came out the same year. Anyway, back to my point, there's no leveling up gene here, you either add a new move to your combo tree at the cost of replacing an old one, and then you simply carry on. God Hand is known for being an extremely difficult game, you will die a lot especially in the beginning. This game really pulls no punches, there's no leveling up nonsense here either, just pure skill. At no point will you be overleveled or judged on the internet for going with certain builds, the difficulty here is all tailor made to where the player is at any given moment. This is why I compared God Hand to Sekiro earlier, both games feature no builds outside of some minor items you can use during battles. So here's where my hot take comes into play. One issue I find myself dealing with in any action game that has you leveling up and choosing which stats to upgrade or to make sure that your weapon is at least +8, is that it takes away from my enjoyment with those titles and in my opinion somewhat trivializes the game itself. For instance, when you fight a boss in say Dark Souls, you're constantly thinking, am I the right level here? Should I maybe grind and look for better equipment? Maybe I should look up a video on an OP build to get past this tough boss. Sometimes as well, when you do beat a boss on your first time, you're played with the thought of maybe it wasn't your skill and it was just a build that you was using carried you, or maybe you was just over leveled. Also, God forbid you rely on external mechanics such as summoning with the FromSoft community. My point here, and I apologise if I spent too long explaining it, is that I would much rather be given a stick in an action game and destroy every enemy until the credits with that same stick, never having to level it up or worry about the magic stick or the bleeding stick. What annoys me about leveling up in action games is I understand they make titles like Elden Ring and Dark Souls more casual friendly, but I hate the idea of my stats carrying me or just the fact that you can uneven the playing field by being over leveled. If I wanted a game where I had to worry about builds and leveling up, I play a JRPG. Personally, I feel conflicted whenever these mechanics are implemented in action games since I feel like they create a lot of dissonance for the player at times and it reflects on how gatekeeper the community for those titles can be. When it comes to those games communities, there's no gatekeeping in the Sekiro side of the FromSoft community since everyone beat the game on mostly the same experience outside of maybe having to heal more alongside some slight changes in playstyles. Once again, this is just my own personal opinion, I just find that action games like Sekiro and God Hand in this case offer pure satisfaction and peace of mind knowing that it was all you earning that victory with no gatekeeping in sight. This isn't me hating on leveling up systems, I love JRPGs, but in action games I can't help but wonder how much of it was skill when stuff like leveling up exists, and just the idea of possibly being over leveled and people posting recommended levels for bosses just feels wrong to me. I also just really hated seeing build guys claim to be OP, which happened every week when Elden Ring got consistent patches, which was so annoying. It's just strange since nowadays when it comes to action games there is rarely any that appeal to players who prefer no upgrade nonsense, which is why God Hand with all of its bare knuckles and kicks really stands out when looking at the game today where action games are starting to all look the same combat wise. This realization really hit me when I played Stellar Blade for the first time and realized how much it takes from FromSoft's action game formula. I understand the idea of taking influence, but even on social media people are starting to want more variety in this genre. Also, a small disclaimer, or well post disclaimer, I absolutely love FromSoft, they are giants in this genre for a reason and are well worth their praises, but I feel like devs should maybe stop taking so much influence from them since this genre is starting to all look the same. God Hand really was and still is ahead of its time. If Twitch was around in 2006, I feel like similar to how Dark Souls was praised and over time became more beloved for its difficulty, we would have had a reality where God Hand would have garnered more of a community that it sadly lacks. It's easy to forget nowadays, but audiences back in 2006 didn't take kindly to difficult games with high skill ceilings, which you can find a lot on message boards from back then. The development in Demon's Souls is a standout example of this and was thankfully the turning point of players appreciating them. As a result of this, alongside the small marketing team, God Hand sadly sold poorly. The incredible director of God Hand is Shinji Mikami, and in 2004, after making Resident Evil 4, he founded Clover Studios, which are responsible for making some of Capcom's greatest games ever made. They were full of creativity, from Beautiful Joe to Okami. Mikami himself is an absolute powerhouse of a director, being responsible for Resident Evil, the game that established horror gaming as we know it, alongside the masterpiece that is Resident Evil 4, which literally invented third-person shooters. Unfortunately, Clover Studios was shut down after the release of God Hand, and alongside it a piece of Capcom itself. The aftermath of this is still being seen up until today, having them swept its more experimental titles away and relying more on safe series that, whilst incredible, made fans really want to return to the more experimental stuff. But thankfully things are looking promising, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. One of the most innovative and beloved teams are somewhat back, with Okami 2 being announced alongside the studio's return. A lot of the original talent is back, such as Hideki Kamiya, but not everyone, with the team behind God Hand still being left in the wind until we hear something alongside Shinji Mikami himself, who has moved on to establish Tango Games but has since left before the studio's shutdown. A lot of the team who made God Hand would also form Platinum Studios, where they're still making incredible games to this day that are also experimental and interesting. Okay, this tangent has gone on far too long, let's get back to the game itself and talk about the boss fights. Ask anyone who's into action games and they'll all tell you the same thing: the greatest boss fights are typically 1v1s where both fighter is of the same build. No insanely oversized enemies that block the camera and force you to use the claw grip here. The developers truly understood what makes amazing bosses with God Hand. Each fight feels like something out of an anime. I'm typically not a big fan of shonen action heavy moments, but here it's done so well that I can't help but get swept up in it all. I love how Gene lifts his fists up after launching someone across the screen. It makes me want to do it myself in real life. The animations go such a long way in making you feel every hit. The camera in God Hand requires no control from the player, but then being able to make quick 180s to turn around, no claw grip or lock on shenanigans here. This sounds strange at first until you realise the developers designed all this so that you never have to fight for camera control, your hands are always centered on the combat. Automatically locking onto a target is an aspect I feel like nowadays game designers don't really think about, they just implement it in. If you're fighting a giant enemy and the camera struggles to keep up, or if you can't properly see your character, it's kinda what's expected, but I always feel like this feels like an oversight whether intentional or not. In God Hand, the camera automatically locks on, and all the enemies are human sized, making combat feel incredibly smooth with there never being any issues. Outside of that, there are a few bigger bosses, but everything is still all centered perfectly, almost like there's a cameraman following you around at all times. It's another small aspect of this title that goes a long way in making every hit and animation feel satisfying. Sometimes the auto camera locks onto a certain enemy that maybe you wasn't interested in, but I kinda prefer this, and if you just accept it and go with the motions whilst relying on your crowd control moves to make sure you don't get overwhelmed, you'll always be able to handle the flow of battle. It takes some getting used to, but it's all a part of what makes combat in this game so amazing. My favourite boss fight in particular is this one samurai fight that I spent hours on. He uses his clones to try to throw you off. He also relies heavily on long strings that you have to perfectly dodge. Being able to dodge these perfectly feels amazing. The tension in this fight in particular is some of the best I've ever seen in a game, as you constantly have to keep your eyes on the boss, all whilst running around frantically to find healing items. Just some miscellaneous points, but man, is there so much beauty in the simplicity of God Hand. The game hasn't aged as well as Clover's other titles visually, but even to deal with a simple upres, the art style can stand on its own, especially with the unique character designs and level themes. I really can't think of any criticisms for this game, but if I really had to, I would say that some of this game's comedy hasn't aged particularly well. If you grew up with watching things like Jackass and South Park, it's very much inspired by those shows. It's kinda like going back to Conker's Bad Fur Day nowadays. Granted, there's nothing insanely offensive here, but it's sure to raise a few eyebrows, especially with some of the stereotypes this game has. I did like some of the comedic moments with Gene and Olivia. They have a fun bit of back and forth, and some of Gene's one-liners are funny in a strange and somewhat awkward way.
I found this in our room. Here, look.
Isn't this a demon seal? What an evil bitch.
I want you to help those people.
What? Don't you look at me like that.
Well, you do have the God Hand.
All right already, I'll go. But they know we're here now. We need to find a safer place.
Aw, Gene, you're worried about me.
No way. I'm gonna get her back one of these days.
I also just like the running gag where characters randomly trip over. It's silly, but it's the kind of visual humour anyone can get with. Now, it's become somewhat of a tradition to bring up the game box art in these styles of videos. Especially when God Hand first came out, when social media wasn't what it is today and hidden gem style videos simply didn't exist. Anyway, the Japanese box art is absolutely stellar. It looks like something from a manga like Berserk. The use of minimalism here goes a long way in conveying the kind of game that this is. Anyway, so here's the Western one. I get this isn't terrible, but the real model human doesn't paint this game in any particular way. It looks more like a magazine cover. I get the designers wanted to center the namesake God Hand front and center, but nothing about this makes it particularly eye-catching. As much as I love this game, the story is second to the gameplay. This box art isn't as bad as previous examples, but nothing here leaves any impression. Sometimes being 3D Marina Lightyear's Nightmare Fuel is more memorable than being just forgettable. Unfortunately, God Hand has had no modern means of officially accessing the game outside of the PlayStation 3 storefront, leaving second-hand outings to be insanely overpriced. Once again Capcom, you need to remaster this game so that hopefully it can find a bigger audience. Even Hideki Kamiya himself has showed his interest in wanting to make a sequel. Even the God of War dev stated how God Hand was a huge influence for the combat in the soft reboot. I also feel like in some sense the action gaming scene could really use a shake-up with something like God Hand being that innovation. In conclusion, despite being made over 15 years ago, God Hand has aged like a fine wine. Back in 2006, it might not have been appreciated for its quality, but nowadays through the modern lens of 2025, it hasn't aged a day and it's only become more fine art with that time. Unlike some previous games I covered here, I'm somewhat hopeful that we'll see God Hand again in the future, be it a remaster or hopefully a sequel. But only recently have I actually fought with this optimism since we now have the resurrection of Team Clover. But in the meantime however, I definitely recommend giving this game a shot through any means that you can, since words truly can't do anything for this title in comparison to actually playing the game yourself. But what are some of your thoughts on God Hand? I'm curious. Also, any feedback on this video would be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.